All right. The last podcast dealt heavily with nutrient cycling, the reusing of our nutrients, our building blocks for living things. We're built out of these molecules. But this podcast is going to talk about the thing that we can't hold, and that's energy and how it flows through an ecosystem. Okay? So, energy flows through trophic levels in an ecosystem. What we mean is that our ultimate source of energy for all life on Earth is, well, almost all life on Earth. The life on Earth we are familiar with is the sun. Okay, there are other ecosystems on Earth that are not based on energy from the sun, like those that are down at deep sea vents. But for us, the ultimate source of energy is the sun. That energy of the sun is captured and converted to chemical energy by producers, plants, algae, things like that. Okay? And then when those plants are eaten by primary consumers or herbivores, some of their energy is taken up and placed into the herbivores. And when those herbivores are eaten by secondary consumers, or carnivores, secondary consumers, then their energy is passed to them. So energy just flows from the sun through the life forms on the planet. Now, something we need to keep very clearly in perspective, though, is that producers catch energy from the sun, but they do not pass 100% of the energy they ever caught from the sun to the next level in the ecosystem. They just don't. They pass very little of that energy up. Why? Well, a lot of this energy that they got from the sun gets lost. Where does it get lost to? Well, that's what we need to talk about. Okay? So, let's first make sure we understand food chains and trophic levels. Okay? Trophic levels are feeding relationships, okay, within an ecosystem. Food chain is just a very specific look at different trophic levels using very specific organisms to give examples. And all food chains, at least here on the surface of the earth where we hang out, start with energy from the sun. So here's our starting point right there. That energy is captured by plants or some other photoautotroph like algae or maybe a photosynthetic bacterium. And these producers, these autotrophs that we call producers, are the first level of all food chains, at least here at Earth's surface. Okay? Food chains beyond that usually go maybe 3, 4, 5 levels. Beyond the producers, maybe one more level than this, maybe. You are pretty limited as to how far you can go. Why? Because the energy transfer from here to there, from here to there, from here to there is not perfectly efficient. It is not a 100% transfer of all energy up the ladder. It is not perfectly efficient. Now, we'll get back to why it's not in a moment, but also at all levels of this food chain would be present decomposers, that if any of these die or leave waste behind, these decomposers will take that remains of that animal and recycle it and get energy out of those remains as well. Okay? Now, let's talk about this inefficiency of energy transfers. There is loss from one trophic level to the next. Why? Well, because it's not free to live. Animals have to use energy just to live. So, this bug that is munching on this leaf, okay, he is going to use the energy he gets from this leaf to do his own life processes. cellular respiration, the using of food to get energy to do stuff, okay? You're doing this process all the time. You eat food, your cells take it and turn it into energy so you can do things like listen to this fascinating podcast. Also, you lose a bunch of your energy you get as just waste. So that's a shame, but there you go. So these are just daily living. And so that energy is lost. What goes up the trophic level is all that the organism has when he dies locked up in his actual body tissues, which is just a small fraction of whatever energy he's obtained throughout the course of his life. This is the only stuff, the material in the organism's actual body, that's going to move on up to the next food chain if he gets eaten. Okay? And honestly, if you look, here's our energy from the sun. The producers, let's say, they get a perfect 1 million joules calories. It's an energy unit of sunlight. Okay? Well, only 100,000 of those energy units would be passed up to the next level, to the grasshoppers, and only 100 of those units would be passed up to the next level, the herbivores, the secondary consumers, and only 1 of those units would be passed up to the next level, the carnivores. So you can see we're losing energy as we go up the food chain, and that's why when we are looking at diagrams that show how energy is represented at each of the trophic levels or so on, we get this pyramid idea, okay? In reality, only about 10% of energy is passed from one trophic level to the next, only about 10%, generally speaking, okay? Don't forget that these pyramids can be based on other parameters besides energy. We can physically go out into a field and weigh all the different creatures. We can weigh the primary producers, like the plants, the primary consumers, the herbivores, the secondary consumers, the tertiary, if we get up that far, consumers. We can mass them, and we could create a pyramid of biomass. It's going to tell us basically the same thing as a pyramid of energy. We are just measuring actual mass of living things in the ecosystem. And we do find for sure that there's much more mass of producers than there are consumers going up the trophic levels. We could also do a pyramid of numbers where we actually count organisms. You want to go out there and count 5,842,424 blades of grass? Probably not, but you could do it. And you can see that energy is lost as we go up. Numbers are lost as we go up that pyramid of numbers. Food webs, let's not forget what those are. Basically, food chains are really not just an isolated thing. They are linked together into much more complex food webs, diagrams that discuss that reflect who eats whom in an ecosystem. Certainly a species can weave into the web more than one position. You can see that if we look at these arrows, by the way, the arrows show that this guy, for example, is getting eaten by penguins, but he's also getting eaten by fish. So the head of the arrow shows who's doing the eating. Okay, the head of the arrow shows who's doing the eating. This end of the arrow shows who's getting eaten. Okay, and you can see these krill are entering into this food web in many, many, many positions. Many things are eating them, and so on. And while this penguin is eating the krill, it can also get eaten by a whale, and so on. So, last slide on this, since we're talking about eating and passing on energy, unfortunately other things can get passed on when animals eat each other as well. Pollution can be a real problem, especially if you have a pollutant that does not break down over time. This can result in a nasty event called biological magnification. DDT is an example of a chemical that works this way. It was a pesticide, a very effective one. But the trouble with it, when you sprayed it around in the environment, it does not degrade. It doesn't degrade, and it doesn't degrade when it's ingested by an animal. It gets in their tissues and it's locked up in those tissues. PCBs are another chemical that work this way. I believe there was a huge problem with PCBs in the James River many years ago down near Hopewell, where all those factories are. Mercury is another example of something that works this way. So let's look at the example of DDT. DDT is sprayed in the environment and kills mosquitoes, yay. But it also gets run off into the water supply. And if you look, the concentration initially in the water seems very small, 0.0000, I've lost track, 0.0003 parts per million, very small. But the plankton in the water consume as they are feeding in the water, end up consuming some DDT. And it doesn't degrade once it gets in their tissues. It simply builds up and builds up until all of a sudden, look, we're at 0.04 parts per million locked up in the tissues of the zooplankton. Well, when small fish eat the plankton, they eat a bunch of plankton and this DDT builds up in them. It doesn't degrade. So now we've upped the concentration again. When the larger fish eat the smaller fish, again, it's not going to degrade. It's going to build up in their tissues, 2 parts per million, until we get to the top level predators eating this guy, and he's going to get a huge dose of this toxin in his body that's not going to degrade. What happened in real life was that eagles, ospreys, and other fish-eating birds were eating large amounts of this DDT when they would eat fish. The DDT acted to make their eggs extremely fragile so that they would crush them when they sat on them. So that's biological magnification in one example. The reason it's called that is because essentially you are magnifying the concentration of the poison as you go up the food chain. As you go up the food chain, the amount of poison is getting bigger, so it's magnifying it. Okay, I think, oh yeah, pelicans were affected too, and this is a photo of what happened to their eggs after being exposed to DDT. Okay, all right, I think that's pretty much it for this podcast. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have questions. Take care.